When you're in a conversation with someone, your inclination, if you don't practice mindfulness and meditation, is I got to think about what I want to say next.
People don't like to hear no. People want to be accepted.
The opposite of explaining is asking a question, not just any question. But when you ask someone a question, the brain has to hold up its end of the bargain.
I don't feel like my best thoughts are manufactured. I think my best thoughts come out when I'm having natural conversation with people.
Why does it matter to me as a homeowner if I have reinsurance? What is the terrible, no good, very bad thing that could happen if that is something that my insurance company is doing?
Another thing that you do really well that I think a lot of salespeople can learn from is you identify what people are actually buying. I've always said Facebook's for social credibility and LinkedIn is for professional credibility. So my audience on Facebook, even though there's some cross-pollination.
If your intent is to book a meeting with everyone, you don't sound like Kendra. But if your intent is to sort, to your point, you have an abundance mindset, like if it's not a fit is a perfectly good outcome for myself as a sales professional and for the prospect.
If you were able to sit back, again, it goes back to what I said before, and ask questions with the intent to understand as opposed to just come back and get somebody by the throat if they don't agree with you, life would be a lot easier for all involved. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game. Today, we have a guest who is no stranger to our community. He was the keynote speaker who opened up a very early Producers in Paradise several years ago in Key West. I call him several things: the captain of cold calling, the lieutenant of labeling, the master of mirroring, and the doctor of detachment, Mr. Josh Braun. What's going on, man?
David, if this Florida Risk Partners thing doesn't work out for you, you got a voice for radio, man. I mean, you could easily transition right into that thing. No problem.
Yeah, funny story. We used to do, when COVID hit, we looked for things to try and keep people's spirits up. Really no personal gain from doing any of it, but we invented COVID karaoke in our living room. And every weekend during COVID, we would get my wife and kids and we would just solicit people on Facebook for the playlist. And like a bunch of big dumb animals, we would just get up and sing whatever the people wanted us to sing, and we would live stream it on Facebook. So yeah, maybe not necessarily a voice for radio, certainly not a voice for live streaming on Facebook, but we'll figure it out. Anyhow.
Yeah.
Well, look, man, I'm excited to have you coming back. I mean, you know, I follow you on LinkedIn. You're everywhere on there, and I'm on there every day, just going, and I spend more time reading than I spend sharing most of the time, which I think is probably a fairly good formula. But you have to share some too. And you know, I don't think your message has changed at its core in years. Like, I really don't. I mean, and I would argue mine hasn't either. My message hasn't changed in 20 years as far as the root of what my message is, but the delivery and some of the things that we use at the point of sale or interacting with people has. And we're at a point right now where, you know, everything is so AI focused, like that you can't go into any room, any conference in my industry specifically, and not hear people chirping about AI. And I also know that we see it on LinkedIn every single day. It's starting to get, I'm not going to give it the credit of saying it's getting pretty good. It's getting better, you know, and it's gone from, we still have the people who invade the inbox, you know, the second you connect with them, and it's completely manufactured. Who I'm talking about are the people that live in the comments now, and whatever software they're using to do that is epic. So I'm interested in your perspective as somebody who is extremely successful on LinkedIn and basically lives there most of the time. What are your thoughts on where AI has taken us, and what has it done to the authenticity of the human relationship?
Yeah, so the ego likes to think that it is very good at writing and creating posts on LinkedIn, and how dare some other thing called AI come in and infringe upon my writing that I created with my brain, right? So the ego is very attached to what it can do. But if you sort of drop back from that a little bit and just look at it objectively, without the lens of this is my writing that you're competing with, I think people would find it very difficult to tell the difference between an AI in the right hands of the right person, obviously, an AI generated post versus a post that was written for a human. And my perspective is, I care less about the teacher and more about the teaching. What I mean by that is I don't care if Josh teaches me something, if an AI teaches me something, if David teaches me something, if some 20-year-old SDR teaches me something that's living in Illinois. What I care about is, does this message resonate with me? Does it make me think a little bit differently about a perspective that I had? And do I walk away with something? And maybe I even want to share it. If so, I'm agnostic to who wrote it. So I'm less about the author and more about the actual content of the message.
I'll tell you what, this is what my thoughts are, and it's honestly pretty basic. I don't feel like my best thoughts are manufactured. I think my best thoughts come out when I'm having natural conversation with people. And so, where I have used AI specifically, and this is going back 2 or 3 years ago that I started doing this, is I record everything I do. Everything, every single thing I do. All my meetings every day are in Zoom. It doesn't matter if I'm meeting with a client or a prospect, or if I'm in my coaching community doing a call or recording a podcast like this. Every ounce of that is recorded because I know that the real gold is going to come from somewhere in those conversations when I'm not thinking about how can I write something that's going to attract people on LinkedIn. So what I started doing is taking the Otter transcript of those calls at the end of every day, and I store them in a Dropbox until there's enough of them there to make it worthwhile. But then that's where my stuff comes from. It comes literally from real conversations. Do I use AI to create posts in tweets and other things? I absolutely do. What I don't do is use those tools to generate that stuff for me. I take my content, I put it in there, and I ask it to format it in a way to where it's going to read logically and attract the people that I want to attract from it. And because of that, I feel like my content is better, it's more concise. The numbers speak for themselves as far as reach growing and everything else, but I don't even pay attention to that as much as I pay attention to, are people engaging in the comments and having a real conversation, number one. And the other thing that I always look at is the number is profile views, because if somebody cared enough to go look at my profile, then that means I triggered something. Whether they engaged or not, they at least cared enough to go and look. And if I know those two things are kind of fitting in the framework where I think they should be, then I'm good with it. I'm not going to be an AI hater. What I don't like is like all of the constant automation back and forth that's just kind of slop and not really authentic. I prefer on the direct messages and stuff, I still am going to be the person who actually types those responses out and reaches out to people. And in many cases, uses a voice recording just to show I'm a real person, as long as it don't, it's not going to make me look creepy. But I think that the people who have figured out how to use it in that context have become more powerful in terms of their messaging.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. One question for you. I find myself sometimes using it as like a co-pilot. So maybe I'll struggle with a line, or this part isn't really flowing right. Can you suggest a better transition or a better way to say this? And it'll generate 8 or 10 things. And then I'll say, nah, give me 10 more. And then in the 20 or so, 30 things, there'll be a germ of something. I'm like, that's kind of interesting that I wouldn't have been able to think of. I'm going to take that and I'm going to tweak it a little bit and slot it into this little part of the post. Do you find yourself using it in a similar way or not
Yeah,
really?
absolutely. The other thing I do is I find myself using it to make complex insurance conversations easier to understand. So for me, for an example, you live in Florida, I live in Florida, we both have homeowners insurance and we know what the rates look like. It's been an ever increasing battle in terms of rate, but finally it looks like legislation is fixed. But what a lot of people don't understand is what's really driving that rate, because the average consumer has no clue about reinsurance. And it's not because they're dumb, it's because it's not what they do. They shouldn't know that, but they don't know that the insurance company actually goes out and buys insurance on that property so that they're not on the hook for the whole thing. And so what happens is, when we have global disasters, earthquakes in in wherever it was, Turkey, mudslides in the Philippines, all of these natural disasters that happen all over the world, those tap into the reinsurance market because they're catastrophic, and the reinsurance market is global. So when they take losses, even if they're only upping the rates they charge the carriers by a couple of pennies, it is a very dramatic effect to everybody underneath because it's such a large volume that they write. And so I actually put out a Facebook post about this, but I went in and typed exactly how I would type it if I were talking to somebody that does what I do every day. And I said, could you please write this so that it's appropriate for a social post at roughly a sixth grade reading level so that it's easy for everybody to understand? And it took everything that I typed, made it very succinct, very easy to understand. And the amount of engagement I got from that from people who are like, holy cow, I never knew that that's why this was the way it is. I didn't even know this existed. Da 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 da. So I do use it that way a lot. And the other thing that I do, I still am not as good as at detaching from the outcome as I need to be. So sometimes I get a little fired up and I immediately, my initial response would have been back in the day, bang out an email and get, I got him back and hit send. Now I take that and I go over to Chat GPT. I type whatever I normally would have typed and said, please turn this into a professional response. And it'll keep me out of trouble.
So this is a really interesting segue into what I call poking the bear, and you're exceptional at this because I saw you do it as a member of your group when I was preparing for last year's talk. This idea of shining a light or illuminating potential problems that people might not be aware of that can hurt them. From a reinsurance perspective, one of the things I didn't understand, again, as a layman, and maybe this helps you as well to clarify your message, is why does it matter to me as a homeowner if I have reinsurance? What is the terrible, no good, very bad thing that could happen if that is something that my insurance company is doing?
Yeah, so you don't have a vote. That's the first thing. The insurance company is insuring against their own risk. So let's say we're to keep the numbers simple because I'm a big dumb animal. $500,000 is what a home's worth. Your carrier may only be responsible for the first 100,000 and they sold the other 400 to a reinsurance company who's protecting them. So from your perspective, everything's on the same policy. They're going to be covered for up to that, up to that $500,000, but then they share that risk with somebody else on the back end, which allows them to be able to take more risk and keep pricing down. The reinsurance companies typically aren't attaching to the value until it's at 100,000. So you can essentially look at it as if they're taking $100,000 deductible on a $500,000 house. So they're gambling that nothing's going to happen that's going to cost more than $100,000. So they're not going to have to come in and end up paying claims above and beyond that amount. So mechanically, that's not exactly how it works, but conceptually, that's kind of how it works. The homeowner never sees it. The problem is every single company, and you'll see this now that we talked about it, but you'll see in the news right now, Florida carriers are coming out left and right because we just got out of the season of them negotiating their reinsurance treaties for the year. That's what sets the rate. Once they have that locked in, now they can go file for their rate decreases with the state of Florida. So we're seeing so and so filed for 15%, so and so filed for 20%. You're going to see that all over the place. And the main reason that's happening is because they had a very favorable reinsurance renewal, primarily because we didn't have a lot of natural disasters last year. We didn't have a single hurricane in Florida for the first time in how long? And there wasn't a ton of global stuff that it would have impacted reinsurance. So they were able to get a better rate. That rate gets handed down. It's just a matter of how many years in a row can we do this to make sure that, we continue to have rate decreases. And there's some legislation and things that have happened in between, but it's really, they're two separate issues.
All right. So if my house were to suffer a catastrophic, let's say a hurricane came barreling through here, and let's say my house was worth 500 grand and the house got decimated, and I had an insurance policy that had reinsurance, wouldn't I just get the fine? Like, what's the risk involved in me
There's
if
no
I
risk
have?
for you. It actually makes your company that writes the paper more financially stable because they're not taking the whole 500,000.
I
So
understand.
I'm going to use a name. People, we have no idea if Joss is insured by them or not, but Tower Hill is a carrier that we represent. Tower Hill is going to adjust that claim. They're going to make all the payments. Everything's going to happen based on what their policy language says, and it looks no different to you. You have no idea. You would have to go to somebody and say, "Hey, can you tell me who your reinsurance program is with, and when the last time was that you negotiated your treaty, so that you have an idea when rates may go down again." That's it. It's seamless for you. You would have no understanding of it, and that's one of the reasons why it's such a difficult thing to explain to people is because it's like explaining, the tooth fairy or something like that. We know that the money's under our pillow, but we don't know how it gets there.
And
But
are
yeah,
you
it
are you
has.
explaining this because you're trying to get people to switch or to do something different than
No,
what
I
they're
was
doing?
explaining it to honestly be a public service announcement to all my friends. I really don't talk shop very much at all on Facebook. To me, I've always said Facebook's for social credibility and LinkedIn is for professional credibility. So my audience on Facebook, even though there's some cross-pollination, it's usually just me showing pictures of my kids or whatever we made for dinner the night before or all the things you do on Facebook. But I saw so many people were complaining about it, and I would even get tagged from people who were asking me what my opinion was. I just decided, you know what? Let me figure out a way to explain this and get it down. As my friend Scott Howell would say, let's get the hay down to where the goats can get it.
It's great. That's great. It's great.
Yeah, so I mean that was a long diatribe about, about AI on LinkedIn, but I mean here's the thing. I think what you preach is so important because there are so many things that we are ingrained with as salespeople that I know you disagree with. I also disagree with the majority of it because it ends up manifesting itself is overly eager, overly aggressive, perhaps even desperate, but very forceful in how you lead the dance with a prospect. And Voss talks about it in Never Split the Difference. Any negotiation should be viewed not as your adversarial, but you're actually dance partners where one leads and the other one goes, or vice versa. And one of the reasons why I wanted you to come back to Producers in Paradise is number one, it's grown, and a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to hear you yet, even though they likely follow you. But I want that to get in, I want them to hear that message because I am a huge believer of being able to just ask a question and sit back and listen. And that's not the way I always was, but I feel like we have a proclivity to ask questions with an intent to respond to people and not an intent to understand the problem they're facing or the perspective that they have. And when you can make that switch and you ask the question and you truly actively listen to understand where they're at, the sales game gets a whole lot easier.
Yeah, so traditional selling, if we're talking about outbound or something like a cold calling, is predicated on the idea that it's the seller's job to talk the person on the other end of the phone into booking a meeting. Like that's the intent, that's what they're paid on. And so it's not a surprise that if that's your intent going into the call, you're going to say and behave in ways that come across as feeling pushy and needy. That's just biological because what your intent is affects your behavior. So same thought, same intent, same behavior. So traditional salespeople will make a cold call and they'll say, "Hey, my name is James. I'm with Acme, and the reason for my call is X, Y, and Z. We help companies like A, B, and C do C. The reason for my call is to explain to you how we do this. Do you have your calendar ready?" So this idea of explaining creates the pressure, which makes prospects repel. So if you're explaining or convincing, you're losing because you're subconsciously feeding into the stereotype that people have with salespeople. So I realized this very early on in my career that the more I was explaining, the less people trusted me. And so I was like, what's the opposite of explaining? Like, what can I do that's the complete opposite of that? Well, the opposite of explaining is asking a question, not just any question, but when you ask someone a question, the brain has to hold up its end of the bargain. I mean, we'll do a quick little experiment right here with you, David. If I were to say to you, David, um, the reason for my call is that we sell the most amazing butter pecan ice cream in the world. And the purpose of my call is to schedule some time so you could taste it. You're going to recoil even if you don't like butter pecan. But if I said this to you, "Hey, David, Um, as you probably know, the most popular flavors of ice cream are chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. David, what's your favorite flavor ice cream?
I love them all, Josh, but I specifically like cookies and cream.
Okay, so what am I doing here? Because I'm asking you a question in a non-threatening way, I'm trying to figure out what's the current state of what David likes. There's no resistance. So how this might look on a cold call, if I was selling something, it might be something like this. So Josh, I know that you like to wash your car on the weekends, and I know you use a bucket and sponge to do that with. I'm not sure if this is happening with you, but a lot of times when people wash their car with a bucket and sponge, dirt can get trapped in the sponge and can scratch their car.
Mm.
And when you wash your car, how are you making sure that doesn't happen? And then shut the front door and listen, right? So
Yep.
another example. Hey, Bob's plumber. After hours, when people are trying to call in and schedule a time, how are you handling those calls? Do you send it to like a service? Are you doing like automated text messages? Or are you using an AI dispatcher that automatically books the call?
Yeah, we have an AI assistant.
Right. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out what's the current way, right? So I'm trying to figure out what they're doing to see if there's even a problem. And that's the shift. Because
Yeah,
if
and
I'm
I'll
not
tell you what,
attached,
man. The other thing I would say is just I want to clean this up for everybody. I think people probably thought when I said cookies and cream, I threw you off the rails a little bit. I didn't, because if you're paying attention to what Josh is talking about, a very natural reaction for him would have been to say, "Oh, it sounds like you're a little bit of a deviant. You don't like the main three. Are there any other flavors besides cookies and cream you've tried before and you like?" And now we're going to talk about all the flavors of ice cream that I like, and you keep the conversation going. So I wanted to make sure people made that connection, because we went to another question and another question, but the reality is you did exactly what you wanted to do in asking that. And even though I said cookies and cream, that tells you, okay, this guy's at least going to finish the conversation and talk ice cream with me. Let's figure out how we can navigate this and if it's going to make sense to talk about what we do.
that's exactly right. Because there's no sense in talking about what you do outside of the context of a problem. So if I'm selling a specific type of ice cream and you tell me I don't eat ice cream, I'm lactose intolerant, there's no value in me telling you about my praline ice cream because there's no solution that's necessary. There's no problem there. It's the same thing with the AI dispatcher. If I was selling an AI dispatcher and someone's already using an AI dispatcher, I'm probably not going to have a big enough expensive problem to be able to displace that person. But if they're using an outsourced teleservice or they're using text messaging, I might then say, how's that been going for you? Oh, you've probably looked into using an AI dispatcher, right? So I'm
Mm.
going to kind of follow that thread. The idea here is to shift the intent at the cold call instead of being attached to the outcome and assuming that it's your job to talk everyone into a meeting. The shift that I made for myself and my clients is to let go of that assumption and detach from the outcome and to ask yourself at the beginning of every conversation this simple question: is there a problem here? Is there a problem here? Because that resets the whole vibe of the conversation because I'm not assuming it and you sound completely different on the phone. Like, I don't know. Here's a question I'm going to ask in a neutral way to illuminate a potential problem. And then I'm going to lean back and hear the answer without gripping to any kind of outcome. So in the car example, he could have said, I don't wash my car anymore. It's an old beater. Or I have someone else wash my car. At which case, that's not going to be a fit for my grit guard, which is a device that sits on the bottom of the bucket. You scrub your sponge on it and dirt settles to the bottom of the bucket and off your car so you don't scratch it. If they're having someone else wash their car, that's not a fit. That's a great outcome if determined in 45 seconds.
Hmm.
It's a terrible outcome if you determine that 3 months from now and you're booking meetings with, more expensive salespeople. So you're sorting, not selling. And that energy changes the entire cold call. It actually lowers resistance and gets people opening up and telling you the truth, which is there a problem here that I want to talk a little bit about or not? And you're cool either way.
Yeah, I think, another thing that you do really well that I think a lot of salespeople can learn from is you identify what people are actually buying, right? You're wearing a nice Submariner. It looks like a Submariner. It may be a GMT. I can't tell from here. I'm wearing a Cartier Santos. I took the day off of wearing my sub today, but I didn't buy this to tell time. I bought it because I wanted the status that came with having a Cartier Santos. Just like you wanted, maybe you're using your Submariner for diving. I find largely people don't. They just they just like the timepiece. But people always say they're not buying a watch, they're buying status or they're buying confidence or whatever. And I think that you do a really good job of looking at things that we stare in the face every single day and we think that we understand, and you give a completely different perspective as to where the buyer psyche is, and that changes where questions come from immediately.
Well, something you have to understand, and this is your business, any business, no matter what you sell, everybody has a way of getting the job done today. So I'll just illustrate this. I'm a runner. I run. I'm not doing running bare feet. I have a solution in place. I have sneakers. Like I'm running in my sneakers today. So if you were to call me and try to sell me sneakers, you're going to hear, I'm not interested. I got a vendor for that all day long. So you have to have a perspective. Several years ago, I walked into the mall because my wife was returning something and we were going to have dinner at True Food Kitchen in the town center mall. I didn't need anything. In fact, I had just bought new sneakers 3 or 4 months ago. And I walked into a fit to run store in the town center mall. And if the sales associate said, let me show you these new sneakers, I would have said, I'm good. If she said, can I help you? I would have said, I'm good. If she said, what brings you in today? I would have said, I'm just looking, nothing. But she didn't do any of those things. She looked down at my sneakers and she goes, oh, are you a runner? I go, yeah. She goes, training for any races? And I go, actually, I'm training for my first half marathon. And she said this, and I'll never forget it. You've probably had a running gait test. And I
And
said, what's that? And moments later, and I share this in my workshops, I'm on a treadmill in the store and I'm running, taking this test. And she freezes the frame and she zooms into my ankles. And she goes, notice how your ankles are overpronated when you run. I go, yes, so what? She goes, well, the problem is if you run more than 6 or 7 miles, it increases your chances of getting injured, like plantar fasciitis or runner's knee. Are your shoes made for pronated feet? And I was like, I have no idea. And she goes, if you'd like, I can check them out and see. And about 6 minutes later, I'm spending $180 on new sneakers and insoles. So the point of the story is no matter what you sell, they have sneakers today. So even when you're, David, going out, and you do a really great job of this, I've been part of your group and we worked on this last year, I remember, your audience, your prospects have a way they're getting the job done today. So what we want to do in a poke the bear question is we want to call that out. So, hey, when you're doing this, are you doing A, B, or C? Are you doing A or B? Like, how are you doing? What's the lay of the land? Not I'm selling insurance, because the answer to that is I got sneakers today.
correct.
So one of the best cold calls I ever received was from Kendra Warlaw. She was working at Gravy Solutions at the time. I was in the car with my wife. My phone rings. I pick it up. She goes, Josh? I go, yeah. She goes, oh my God, I didn't think you'd pick up. I'm actually at the drive-thru at Starbucks. And I go, oh, okay. How can I help you? She goes, hey, Josh, I know you sell courses. When someone goes to buy one of your courses, but the credit card fails, how are you recovering that payment today? Are you doing that yourself using Dunning software or some outsourced recovery team? Almost impossible for me to say I have a vendor for that, because she's calling out the current ways. So I said, I use Stripe for that. And she said this: it sounds like you're logging into Stripe pretty frequently to check how many failed credit card payments you have. And I said, I don't think I've ever done that once. And she said, if you'd like, I can send you instructions on how to check. And if you are seeing a lot of failed payments, perhaps we can continue the conversation. And I said, sure. And 5 minutes later, she sent me instructions on how to check Stripe. Turns out I did not have the problem, and there was no need to chat with her. But if I did, I would have engaged. What a great example of detaching from the outcome, letting go of assumptions, and illuminating a potential problem, bringing out the current ways, and then leaning back and letting the prospect do the talking. So she's not filling people's heads with information. She's drawing it out. The saying that I have is, sellers have the questions, buyers have the answers. Our job is to ask these very neutral questions that get people to think differently. Why does this matter? Because when people arrive at the conclusions themselves, it's more believable than if a salesperson tells them, because a salesperson's biased. They have commission breath. But if we ask these questions that get people to scratch their head and think, I'm not sure, like what do you mean? And now they're leaning forward and they're curious. And we did this for you last year. I don't even know if you remember this, but we workshopped 3 or 4 of these kind of questions. These take some elegance and this is a skill that takes some time, because when people first start doing this, the questions sound leading.
Yep.
If I could do this, would you be interested? That's a yes trap. That is going to create that same, I know I'm being led somewhere. These are neutral questions aimed at illuminating potential gaps.
Well, and I think there's another caveat there too that you didn't touch on, and that is that by approaching it that way, giving you the instructions to go into Stripe, she's also pre-qualifying you from her end so that if you're not a good fit, she's not going to waste a bunch of time coming back to you, hammering you for something she's never going to sell you. She's going to give you instructions gracefully and unselfishly, which is something that's pretty uncommon in the sales game, let you go self-select. And if you see that, she knows you're going to be pissed, man. She knows, like, how do I miss this? How come I haven't been logging in? This person is the one who told me I don't have time to do this every day. Now you're going to call her back. But if you go in and you have no issue, you don't call her back and she's no worse for the wear. She's moved on to the next conversation.
I love that you said that, David. And that requires, and you have this, I mean, that requires having an abundance versus a scarcity mindset. So again, it gets back to our earlier discussion. If your intent is to book a meeting with everyone, you don't sound like Kendra. But if your intent is to sort, to your point, you have an abundance mindset. Like, if it's not a fit is a perfectly good outcome for myself as a sales professional and for the prospect, then you simply call the next person and you see if there's a potential problem. I do this exercise in the workshop. I don't know if I did it last year or added it, but I do this exercise where I'm like, okay, imagine that you sell grass-fed beef. I did this on LinkedIn as well. The responses were hilarious. You sell grass-fed beef, make a cold call, and you hear this objection. I'm a vegan. How would you overcome the objection? And everybody was trying to think about ways to overcome the objection. And of course, the punchline is that's not an objection. The person's a vegan.
Right.
So maybe call someone who eats meat. That's a lot of people. But the desire for salespeople to try to figure out a way to overcome and convert a vegan into a meat eater is at like a 10, because of this idea that they think it's their job to convert everyone into a meeting. Rather than what you just did really eloquently, which is to say, if this person's a vegan, you might just say, hey, that's cool. It looks like we're not a fit. Not, do you know anyone that's a meat eater? You just haven't tried our beef. Like that sort of desperation. And you see there was 700 comments and they were all kind of like that. I'm like, that's because it starts with intent. When you're attached to the outcome and you think that's your job, you say and do anything to try to handle it or convert the person. We have a vendor for that is never an objection. It's the truth. Everyone's got something in place today. So your job is to understand it and to see if there's some kind of a gap there. I mean, one thing that illustrates this really wonderfully is I was doing a home renovation project here last year and I got 3 bids. One bid from the guy that was recommended came in like 15% higher. So I said to him, I said, Chris, I wanted to go with you, but you're 15% higher. What he did not do is tell me why he was worth it. Sort of traditional. What he did not do is say, you get what you pay for. What he did do is this. Josh, would it be okay if I ask you a couple questions about those other bids? I said, sure. Now listen to this. Are they using hollow doors or solid wood doors? Because they sound a little bit different when you close them. I'm not sure. When they're redoing your bathrooms, are they using your existing copper pipes that you've had in your house for 20 years, or are they using new copper pipes? For your moisture barrier, are they using Redgate when you put your bamboo floors down? I'm not sure. I don't know. He's creating a knowledge gap. And he's letting me, in my own way, realize that I'm not comparing apples to apples. And if the sound of a hollow door matters, and it doesn't matter to everybody, but it mattered to me, I was like, you know what? I didn't even look at that. And it turns out they're using hollow doors. The price difference wasn't that much, and I ended up going with him. Not because he convinced me, but because he let me see. It's almost like he has a chisel. and he's kind of chiseling away what's there and letting me discover it. And I persuaded myself. So that's the art of poking the bear and creating these, what I call knowledge gaps, not assuming that this knowledge gap matters to the person, because the person could have said, I don't care at all about how a door sounds. And what do you mean? What is this? What is this red gate stuff? Well, it prevents your bamboo from buckling, especially if you have an uneven slab. Well, gee, I have an uneven slab. Let me see what these guys are using. They're using X, Y, and Z. Right? It's almost like, David, that you would like this one. Like if someone said, it's just a simple example. I like this couch, but it costs more than this other couch. Well, this couch is worth it. It's better. You might say this. So do you mind if I ask you a question about the couch that costs less? Sure. So one way, I don't know if this is the case with that couch, but one way couch manufacturers reduce the cost is by reducing the cushion density, which ranges from 1 to 10, 10 being firm, lasts for like 8 or 10 years, 2 or 3 being not as firm, lasts for about 3 or 4 years. What's the cushion density on the sofa that you looked at that was much less money? Oh,
No,
geez.
who knows?
Right.
Who knows cushion density, right?
Well, maybe they do, or maybe they don't care. Maybe I'm renting the apartment, but that's not our job. We don't control the response.
Sure.
It might not matter to that person, right? So it only matters, the benefit or the problem only matters if it matters to the prospect. What we control is illuminating it and seeing if it matters to the prospect, letting them know the terrible, no good, very bad thing that might happen if this happens. Is that something you care about? No, I don't care. I'm renting. I don't really care. I just need a cheap couch. Oh, okay. We're not going to be a fit. I think the cheap couch is going to be a better option for you.
It's interesting to me because it's almost like if you take what salespeople have traditionally done and do the exact opposite. I mean, literally, it's not a straight line, but it's pretty close. People don't like to hear no. People want to be accepted. And I was on a podcast with a guy that's an email marketing guru. Actually lives down by you. His name's Jay Schwedelson. Really, really good podcast for those of you who listen. If you didn't hear that, you should go back and listen to it. It was probably a year and a half ago now. But I remember being on the podcast with him, and we were talking about how pissed off people get when people unsubscribe from their email notifications because of the reasons I just said. They don't want to lose, they want to be accepted or whatever else. And I said, okay, so what's your solution to that? He said, my solution is I'm happy because if they self-selected out, they just made my email list much more accurate for me. And now I'm not going to waste time marketing to people or chasing after people who have no interest in what it is that I do. And it's a really simple mindset shift. It really is. You have to be willing to look at it from a different perspective. But when you do, it makes a lot of sense. But you said something when you were talking about poking the bear and learning to ask the questions and things. And that's one of the things I think that's the most important. We started this conversation with you talking about me losing some weight before we ever hit record. And you asked me what I did here, what I did there. The bottom line is I'm doing something every day and I'm doing it repetitively. And it doesn't matter if you're a musician or an athlete or a student for that matter. You have to be in your craft doing what you need to do to make yourself better every single day. This is no different. And it's so foreign to most salespeople that, to your point, it's really awkward at the very beginning, extremely awkward. But after that, you get better, a little bit better, just like you did when you became the pushy salesperson. You didn't start out that way. You got to that over time through whatever the stimuli were in the environment that you were in. And so, I know you have some tools. I know you have flashcards and things like that. But I mean, what are some of the things you recommend to salespeople that they can do on a daily basis? And then you can shamelessly plug anything you have that would help them with this to have that day to get those daily reps in.
So I'll tell you the thing that's helped me the most and a lot of my clients, um, and that is a daily meditation practice. And I'll explain why. If you don't meditate or practice mindfulness, which is about 99% of the population that doesn't practice, what happens is thought comes into your head, which you don't control, just random thought, and you just react to it. Someone says something, you respond immediately. That's you're sort of on autopilot. With a mindfulness practice, and to your point, David, it's not something you read about. With practice, daily practice, over the 30, 60, 90 days, what ends up happening is you actually can be aware that you're having a thought. That's a major unlock because in that moment of awareness, you can now create this gap, which calms you down and you can decide how you want to respond rather than being on autopilot. This quiets the mind. So a prospect, if you're attached and you don't practice mindfulness, says, do you have cold call transcription services? Oh my God, we have them, the best in the world. They transcribe calls and it uploads it to your opportunity record. And the prospect says, that's too bad. Legal doesn't allow us to record calls even with consent.
Hmm.
But if you have a mindfulness practice, the prospect says something, and instead of reacting, you pause for a second because you're mindful and you can pause between what someone says and what you say, which is not most people. Most people will cut you off. And you're pretty good at this, David. You haven't cut me off once, which is unusual on a podcast, but you pause for a second. And in that moment, you can say, do I want to explain or do I want to be curious? And in that moment of reflection, you can be curious and you can say something like this. We have it. It sounds like call recording is important to you. Well, actually, it's not. Legal doesn't allow us to record calls, even with consent. And then you might pause and say, that's why we allow you to disable call recording at the admin level so nobody can record calls. If you'd like, I can show you.
Hmm.
Right? So when you're in a conversation with someone, your inclination, if you don't practice mindfulness and meditation, is I got to think about what I want to say next. With a mindfulness practice, when someone's done talking, you can wait 2 beats and you can decide if you want to talk. You certainly can. Or you could say, I want to ask a follow-up question to understand the other person better. So you have this idea of choice that you don't have if you don't have a mindfulness practice. If you don't have a mindfulness practice, someone says something, you respond. Someone says, I like this president. And you go, he's terrible. If you have a mindfulness practice, you go, sounds like you have a reason for liking him. And you can seek to understand, even if you don't agree. And this act of making people feel heard and understood is a major unlock. And not just as a salesperson,
No,
because
in life, man.
in life.
Look at social media right now, and you picked the exact worst example by bringing the president up, right? Because that is when you see exactly where we're at as humanity right now. And I'm not somebody that is a big subscriber to getting into religion, sex, or politics in my online discourse. I just think it's a slippery slope. I'm entitled to have my beliefs and you're entitled to have yours. And what they are is really important to me, but not probably as important to you. But for whatever reason, we've gotten to this point now where people on both sides of the aisle politically are just nonstop at each other's throat all the time. And the number of times that I sit back and think to myself, don't we all live in the same country? At its core, don't we all really want the same general things? We want the ability to live a happy and healthy life, make a reasonable living, not pay too much in taxes, know that we're protected, have the opportunity to own land, all of the things that are great about our country, but we get so caught up in the things that quite frankly, we don't have control of at a micro level. And so I see relationships that are decades long get absolutely blown apart because people are so worried about getting entrenched and proving that their point is the right point when they don't ever take the time to just take 2 seconds and step back and try and see things from the other person's perspective. I think that if you were to talk to the majority of the people in the country today, they're probably somewhere in the middle because many of them are disgusted with having to pick allegiance to one thing or the other. And there's no one political party that has the answer to every single thing that I want, right? So I have to pick what's best for me and my family and that fits inside of my belief structure. And I have reasons for doing that. But it doesn't mean that somebody else couldn't pick a different candidate because they need different things out of government than what I do. And I just feel like if you were able to sit back, again, it goes back to what I said before, and ask questions with the intent to understand as opposed to just come back and get somebody by the throat if they don't agree with you, life would be a lot easier for all involved.
But it's a muscle, right? So if you don't have that practice of meditation or yoga or some mindfulness practice, you're not even aware you're reacting. You're just on autopilot. I was at the dog park 5 or 6 months ago. Someone said, where'd you get your dog? And I said, I got it from a breeder. And this lady came at me.
Hmm.
I mean, how dare you? Now, I could have defended it like a mother bear defends its young. But when you're defending and you're explaining, what you're really saying to the other person is, I'm right and you're wrong. So trying to explain is a net negative every time. So I practice mindfulness. And as she was going on her rant about what an awful person I was able to drop back and pause. And I said to her in a very calm voice, this, you love dogs, and if more people adopted, far less would be euthanized. And she just
Completely disarmed.
disarmed and went on and on. And after she got done talking, she goes, well, why did you get a dog from a breeder? Like, so she was now open to it because she felt understood first. And to your point, David, you can understand someone without agreeing with them. And not to get too woo-woo-y. We don't have to get
But
there on this
I mean,
podcast.
that's the key to the whole thing, man, right there. You can understand where they're coming from without agreeing, but you have to have that mental maturity to be okay with that.
You have to have self-awareness. And if you don't have a mindfulness practice or EQ or whatever you want to call it, if you haven't worked on that muscle, especially if it's an emotionally charged topic, like abortion rights or all these other politically charged topics, you are going to explain. And based on my experience, and maybe the listeners as well, when you're explaining, it's not going to go very well because you can have all the facts, logic, and reasons that you want. The other person goes to dig their heels in deeper because you don't get me. So I've been practicing trying to make their case even stronger, trying to figure out why they feel that way. I mean, I just got into another thing with a pro-life person, and I say, life begins at conception. That's how you think. Yeah, this is why. Oh, it sounds like you read something about that. And then after a while, she's like, well, what's your take on it? I'm like, would you like to hear it under review? And it was a civilized conversation versus, let me tell you why you're wrong about that. Let me tell you why life begins at whatever the thing is. So it doesn't really matter what your view is. The idea here is, can you make the other person feel understood? And to your point again, David, it takes self-awareness. That's what the meditative practice and the yoga helps you do after a while. It helps you see your thinking. And in that moment of reflection, you can also think, if you wanted to get deeper, everybody that you're arguing with was 1 year old at one point. And they have had experiences that have shaped them to be who they are now. But everyone was 1 year old at one point. So I want to seek to understand like how they came to this conclusion. And sometimes, many times, someone will say something like, I haven't thought about it that way. Like this abortion conversation was fascinating without getting into my views. Like, who represents the baby in this scenario? Like, if you left the baby alone, it would grow into a baby. Like, who represents the baby in this scenario? I'm like, didn't change my view, but it made me think of it like, oh, that's an interesting angle perspective. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm not saying I'm pro-life, pro-Trump, but I'm like, it was an interesting perspective that I would never have gotten at if I went, full steam ahead.
Absolutely. Well, listen, man, I know you got to get to Miami and I know I got to get into Tampa. So I'm going to wrap it up here. We could go all day long, but we got plenty of time when we're going to be together down in Key West here at the end of June. So thanks a lot for taking time out of your day today, man. Always good to chat with you. I feel like I could tell half your stories on your behalf if I needed to. So I appreciate you putting the content out there and even taking hacks like me and making us better after 20 years. So keep doing what you're doing. I love how you, and by the way, everybody, if you ever want to see Josh do this in real time, just go to one of his posts that's getting a lot of engagement and watch how he handles himself in the comments because it is a real-time display of mindfulness in real life. And it's a never-ending battle on your end, I'm sure, because I can only see what's in the comments. I can't imagine what comes into the DMs. So
It's interesting, but you sort of like can tune out what you don't control and tune in what you do. So sort of
absolutely.
it's a Buddhist thing, but you don't control how people respond on LinkedIn, and everyone's coming at it from their perspective. And again, you just seek to understand people. And it's just a nicer way to go through life.
100%. All right, my man. Have a great weekend. I'll catch you soon.
Take care, buddy. See ya.